In today's episode of the Nerd Byword podcast, Kris and I imagine, what if Stan Lee created a DC universe? Prepare for a deep dive into Stan Lee's work at DC Comics. Ladies and gentle people, welcome back to another installment of the Nerd Byword podcast, the only podcast that is diligently working on a sequel to the comic book masterpiece Trouble. We're calling it Double Trouble Mayday. But before we try anything like that, let's go ahead and talk about what we're actually doing today. We are diving into Just Imagine Stan Lee creating the DC universe. We're going to be looking at 3 issues where Stan Lee, the man of Marvel himself, reimagines some DC superheroes, specifically Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Before we dive into that, though, Kris, it's time for Nerd News! What's cooking?
One of both of our favorite features, Nintendo Switch Online, could soon be getting a huge bolstering in its library. Website Kotaku is reporting that GameBoy games should be coming soon to Nintendo Switch Online, which is a great value. A subscription costs just $4 a month or $20 a year. Features a lot of NES and SNES favorites like Super Metroid, Super Mario World, Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past. But on an episode of Nate the Hate podcast, it really started the rumors that Game Boy games would be coming soon to the service. And it seems like the natural next step. Now, with games like Pokemon Red and Blue and other favorites that are really staples of that entire generation of gaming, this has me really psyched. So a lot of stuff with Game Boy, personally, I missed out on. So getting a chance to play with these is kind of like almost like going back in time and getting a redo to play some of these games that I missed out on. Dave, you got me hooked on the Switch Online. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm actually really excited about this. And before I talk too much about this story in particular, I just want to say that I'm super annoyed. Just super annoyed by Nintendo that they just cannot get their act together for something as simple as their online features. For crying out loud, guys, Nintendo has one of the deepest libraries of fantastic games going back decades. How is it that we only have a handful of NES and SNES games to access on Nintendo Switch Online? I mean, they're not exactly offering features like the eShop that we used to have where you can buy some retro games. Why does this sucker not have N64 support? Why does it not have GameCube support? It absolutely certainly could run those games without a problem on Switch. I really believe that Nintendo Switch Online, just based on the strength of first-party titles that Nintendo has created over the years, could be a service that could rival something like Game Pass, just for, value and bang for your buck. But instead, they're taking years. I mean, the service has been, around for about 3 years, and they're just now talking about Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Like, where's the Game Boy Advance in this? You can't tell me they can't figure out how to make DS and 3DS games run on this thing. I just don't understand what the holdup is here. So yeah, am I excited about having access to Game Boy and Game Boy Color games? Certainly. The Nintendo Game Boy in particular was my very first console, really, and I absolutely adored this thing. I carried it with me everywhere, and it has fantastic games, Zelda Link's Awakening, Super Mario Land 1 and 2, and 3, which was the first Wario game, which is an absolute blast. All the original Pokemon games. The Game Boy Color actually had the very first Shantae game, and longtime listeners know I absolutely adore the Shantae series. It's absolutely fantastic little series of games, and the very first one was a Game Boy Color game. So if Nintendo can reach down deep and pull out not just their first party stuff, but also some of the third party stuff that has famously been basically unavailable and impossible to play for decades now. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. It's again bang for your buck. Nintendo could be shoveling money with their online service if they would actually just hurry up a little bit. 3 years and we're going to have 3 consoles available, in the online service. That seems like ridiculous at this point, don't you think, Kris?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm late to the party on this, so I'm enjoying it, but like it really seems like a lot of untapped potential, like you said. Like that could be, it's nice, and I really really enjoy it. And for $20, it's not like I'm missing. Not like I'm too perturbed about it, but I'm like, you could really tap into something, even if you hike up the price a little bit. I'm never really going to advocate for that, but I mean, there's just stuff that's just sitting there waiting to be done.
Even alone being able to replay The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Seasons, and Oracle of Ages, the 2 Game Boy Color exclusive games that were developed by, I want to say, Konami? Is that accurate? I know that these were not first party developed by Nintendo. They actually had another developer actually develop these, but they were very, very good and a lot of fun to play. And they looked fantastic on the Game Boy Color. I haven't played these since they came out in 2001? It's been a long time. It's been 20 years. There's absolutely an audience for retro games to begin with. And so putting these kinds of games on Switch Online is just going to make it that much more valuable to gamers, I think, Kris.
All right, Dave. So you've got a really wild story that affects one of our previous guests, in fact.
Yeah, it's really, really wild. So there's all sorts of stuff going around social media right now about Action Labs Comics, an 11-year-old comic book publisher based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They operate as both Action Lab Entertainment, and they also have a mature reader imprint, basically called Action Lab Danger Zone. So apparently, a lot of indie creators have been working with Action Lab, and things have gone really sour for many of them. Several are trying to buy the rights to their books back because of how they felt that they have been wronged by Action Lab. We're talking stuff like late payments, missing payments, poor publishing plans, lack of communication. A lot of people are extremely upset. So just looking at the Twitter sphere right now, you have Matt Harding tweeting on September 1st, Action Labs hired me to write a 3-issue comic for $10 a page and then colored for $15 a page. I did it because I thought it was my big break and I put so many good ideas into it. They canceled the comic right before it was about to be solicited with a 1-paragraph email. Jared Lujan is apparently really struggling with them as well. Several people have tweeted at him saying it's ridiculous that they are not even going to publish his book, but he's going to end up being like stuck with a tab of like $3,000 or something. Tom Rogers tweeted regarding Action Lab Comics, on Herald, Lovecraft, and Tesla, I have drawn pencils and inks a total of 264 interior pages, 15 covers, and colored 7 pages and 1 cover. Over the span of its entire publication, I have been paid $4,972.73 for the aforementioned art, which is ridiculous for over 250 pages of interior art and covers. It's pretty mind-blowing what seems to be going on here. And not a whole lot of people seem to be reporting on this. I mean, if you just jump on Google and you Google Action Labs, there's very little that comes up as far as news goes. Rich Johnson of Bleeding Cool has actually spoken to Brian Seaton, who is the current Action Lab president. And Seaton kind of blames a lot of the lack of communication on the fact that COVID occurred, and then he actually resigned from the CEO position for health reasons. and then the previous president resigned at around the same time, and there was really no clear leadership structure. So, there's a lot in the way of, well, this is why it's happening, but there's not a lot in the way of how they're planning on fixing this situation. Johnston asks on Bleeding Cool, what do you think can be done to restore relations with these creators? And Seaton's answer is basically communication. But as far as these incredibly low page rates, apparently the missing payments, the lack of publishing plans, there's really not much said about some of these concerns. It's a pretty wild story. Kris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'm actually in contact with Jared Lujan. Our listeners will remember him being a friend of the show for Twin Blades, also acclaimed writer of Dryfoot. So I'm actually in contact with him at this moment, trying to get him on the show to kind of give us a behind the scenes perspective and his personal experience with this. But this is just mind blowing that, with independent publishers like this, it's like a small business, if you will. Understand that, but like to use COVID and like as this throwaway excuse. I mean, we criticize Disney for that, with the whole Scarlett Johansson situation. I mean, everybody's dealing with this, but I'm always just like an upfront person. Like if you have a problem, just express it and don't, leave it unsaid so we can deal with it accordingly. But when you kind of hide things from people, especially when it comes to an agreed upon amount, and people's livelihoods, like these are how people make a living. So, I mean, like you have to be upfront with that. And when you're secretive like that, it just exacerbates the problem and it's even worse. And the lack of reporting on this is disconcerting as well. It really makes me sad that so much of this is flying under the radar.
I totally agree. I'm really waiting for somebody to, sink their teeth into this story a little bit. And I will say, I think that is something, lacking across the board over sort of the wider range of comics journalism, I guess, is that we're getting a lot of interviews and a lot of promotional material and a lot of goody good coverage for publishers and stories and creators. But unless it's like huge, mind-blowing stuff that kind of blows up the internet, very rarely does somebody sit down and seriously, look into these kinds of allegations or investigate them. There's a real lack of, digging in to the comic book industry. I think that is something that something like the video game industry gets a lot more of. There's a lot more, digging in behind the scenes. I mean, for crying out loud, even Bloomberg has video game reporting now. But the comic book industry does not seem to get that, and I think that is a crying shame, really, Kris.
Yeah, there are a precious few. Like I have certain websites that I follow, like Comics XF. They do a great job reporting, but I mean, like they're just a startup themselves, like trying to report on things. But when you go to the big wigs like comicbook.com and CBR, they're only interested in like the mainstream clickbait kind of stuff. They're interested in the MCU, the DCEU, the film universes, anime, the stuff that's really going to get traffic to their website. So a lot of this stuff is going to fly under the radar unless somehow, some way somebody catches hold of it.
And see, this is actually a pet peeve of mine, because to me, what's happened to the news industry in general, being very click oriented and long form journalism and really investigating over the long term and digging into a story, is kind of falling to the wayside slowly. But I think the comic book industry in particular would really benefit from that kind of coverage, Kris. Alrighty, folks, that's it for Nerd News. Stick around after our first break. We're going to be back with, just imagine, Stan Lee created Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman. All right, folks, welcome back. Here we are. We are going to dig into that very brief time when Stan Lee was not under contract with Marvel, and DC snatched him up for a series of one-shots, allowing Stan Lee to reimagine DC Comics' most famous superheroes with the help of some of the best artists in the business at the time. We today decided to focus very specifically on DC's Trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. So let's go ahead and start with just imagine Stan Lee created Wonder Woman. So this particular one-shot was actually written by Lee, illustrated by Jim Lee, legend by any standard. And the book, according to Goodreads, is summarized as such. We meet Maria Mendoza, a young idealist angered by the way her homeland of Peru has been stripped of its ancient treasures and its people tortured by a sinister individual. When Maria discovers an ancient staff which transforms her into a paragon of power, the likes of which the world has never known, she becomes the only force powerful enough to save her culture. All right, Chris, what did you think of Stan Lee's version of Wonder Woman?
So of the three, I'm, gonna go ahead and throw this out there. This was far and away my favorite of the three. Artist and writer Terry Bloss, who is currently working on Reptile, did a reimagining of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman, the Trinity, if you will, of DC Comics as Aztec warriors. So I actually have in my classroom on display his art of Wonder Woman depicted as an Aztec woman. And, while they're not the same civilization, seeing the Incan mythology, South American culture, Peruvian culture represented here was a real nice change of pace. We usually only hear about Hellenistic mythology, Greco-Roman stuff, with Norse mythology also being very, very popular. Not a lot of love for Aztec, Incan, Mayan mythology. So just seeing the sun god, the Incan sun god, on comic panels was really, really cool. I think that Jim Lee's art, as always, is just impeccable here. Also, seeing Latinx, characters on center stage is really, really cool. And I know that while clunky a lot of times throughout his history, Stan has always tried to kind of push it forward when it comes to representation. But I really, really enjoyed this one. It really gave me like Indiana Jones vibes of like archaeologist. Steve Trevor in this story is an archaeologist. A little bit Zorro vibes. As Maria representing the population and what have you. So I really, really enjoyed this one. It was really fun, really whimsical, and like I said, it's probably of the three, it was far and away my favorite.
I really, really have to say that I loved the redesign of Wonder Woman for this book. There's something about that outfit with like those white pants or something that just really worked for me visually. I really, really like the look of Wonder Woman, which, as we'll go on, we'll find that not every redesign is as successful, but this one looks really, really good in my book. And I will say, yeah, the book is good looking. I think Jim Lee hits his stride again here, as he always does. It is just a very good looking book. And yeah, I will echo what you said just about, bringing some Mesoamerican culture in there, and you're right. A lot of the times the mythologies that literature and comic books focus on are very much of the cracker variety. Like, how wide can your mythology get? Let's go ahead and go Norse. It doesn't get much wider than that. So talking about some Native American mythology is an absolutely fantastic idea. The whole take on this book is a lot of fun, and having Steve Trevor not be just the soldier that pops up and like gets washed ashore on Paradise Island and all that, but like he has a much more clearer purpose in the story with his connection with the villain and his job as archaeologist. I actually thought it was really sad that they basically like offed him right away. Like if this would have ended up, like as an ongoing series, if you imagine it as an ongoing series, I think this version of Steve Trevor probably could have held his own long term in a comic book series with this Wonder Woman much, much better than the actual Steve Trevor, which always seems to kind of get shunted aside because nobody quite knows what to do with him. And I don't think we really have that problem with this version of Wonder Woman. Plus, I really like the characterization. There's a passion in this version of Wonder Woman that I really appreciate. And there's also, I think, Kris, maybe this is something that resonated with you. There are shades of Thor here, especially early Thor. When you have a human being that has to be, in
the
contact
walking
with
stick. Yeah, the walking stick staff. I immediately thought of Donald Blake. Yeah,
that is exactly right. There's very much that part of Stan Lee's vibe that pops up here too. I think it works extremely well, and I actually would love to see more of this version of Wonder Woman. Now, I did a little bit of research, and it appears that this version of the character popped up in a recent DC Comics miniseries called Dark Knight's Metal. And it's kind of a multiverse story, and I'm really pleased, that the multiversal structure allows DC Comics to whip out a character that was so one-off as this Wonder Woman actually feature her again in an appearance. I'd like to see more of her, Kris, really.
Yeah, I will say that like the one kind of nitpick that I have criticism is Mr. Willard, the tabloid type guy at the end was quite cringy, and it was very much of its time. This was written 2001, 2002. And sometimes, if we're being completely honest, I really struggle reading Stan's work as far as it comes towards women, and how they're represented on the page, and their voice and their lack of agency, and how they just swoon towards the man in their lives. And so, like, it was a really breath of fresh air to see this strong female protagonist that avoided some of those tropes, and then kind of fell victim to them towards just those last couple of pages, with this tabloid guy as she's working with him in order to maintain her secret identity. So that part left me a little bit irritated, but the rest of it was a whole lot of fun. I kind of liked what they did with the stakes. Like it was pretty abrupt, and I had to adjust for a minute, but like a lot of people were dying just like right off the bat. So like that, I think that really added to like the adventure, the tales of suspense aspect of it, if you will. So that part I really dug, though.
And it does, it's undeniably a bit tropey in places. I mean, how often do we have to have a superhero whose parent gets murdered? That happens a lot. Oh, my parents died, now I'm going to be a superhero. That happens an awful lot in books. But, it is still Stan Lee, and there is something classical here in the storytelling. You definitely note his touch. You can you get the vibe of it. There's an early Marvel vibe to this in some places, and which is not necessarily a bad thing because a lot of those stories hold up, at least to some extent. But yeah, my final verdict is I really enjoyed this one. I thought this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, also it has like a really cool follow-up story that teases Hawkman and Hawkwoman, not Hawkgirl, Hawkwoman, as they detail it in the pages here. So like I'm really intrigued to read more, read ahead if this story does continue.
Yeah, I'm pretty psyched as well, and there is a lot more to this, Just Imagine series. I mean, I have an omnibus sitting here that is just like a giant paperweight, so I think we're going to have a lot of reading material out of this. All right, Kris, so that gets us through Wonder Woman. I think we started off on the right foot, because the other two stories get a little bit more problematic. So let's go ahead and talk Superman. Here is Stan Lee's version of Superman, a summary according to Goodreads. Salden, a brave but puny policeman on an alien world where science has made its ordinary people supermen by earthly standards, must track down an escaped criminal named Gorok. Journeying in an experimental spacecraft, the bitter enemies are marooned on Earth. Arriving in Los Angeles, he discovers that Earth's environment gives him abilities far beyond those of ordinary humans, and decides to devote himself to solving the world's problems so that Earth can focus on technological advancement and provide him with a trip back home. Talent agent Lois Lane quickly dubs him Superman. Kris, you know what? I'm gonna definitely let you go ahead and start with this one.
God.
What were your thoughts on Stanley's Superman?
Okay, so it was by far and away the weakest of the three. It was just like you said, it was problematic. It was weird. It like I guess Stan, God love him. It was very reminiscent of like 1930s and 40s comics of like Flash Gordon, I guess. I kept thinking of Duck Dodgers of the 24th and a half century from that's it kept going back to that. It's just like really weird type sci-fi, which usually you can get me to buy in with sci-fi, but this was just some weird choices. I thought the character design on Sardin's wife was awesome, though. Gave me real Megan from Excalibur vibes with the hairstyle, the cheekbones. Unfortunately, she dies. So it was just really weird. I think the thing that bothered me the most about this story was the depiction of Lois Lane. Even with my limited exposure to the character, I've fallen in love with at least the comic representation of the character, not so much Amy Adams. Bless her heart, she didn't have much to do in those movies. I'm a fan of Elizabeth Tulloch's performance with some of the small screen stuff I've seen, but that like dog with a bone type of reporter, like really relentless in the pursuit of doing the right thing from a journalistic perspective, holding the feet to the fire of the authority figures, the people in power, and it really kind of turned it on its head. And like, it's Lois Lane in name only. Like, she's this kind of scuzzy talent agent that's all about the bottom line and making money off of Superman. So like, that one was probably the most problematic and most bothersome aspect of this story. I thought Sardin came across as like just a cardboard cutout. Everything the Superman haters say that Superman is, so not a whole lot of personality or depth here. So yeah, not a lot that. One of my favorite panels was Superman is trying to find his name, so he just looks at an ice cream truck, and then he looks at the street sign next to it, and one side of it's like Clark Parker ice cream, or no, Peter Clark ice cream, and then Parker Kent streets like intersection. So obviously as subtle as a gun Peter Parker homage right next to Clark Kent. So yeah, did not enjoy this one very much at all, unfortunately.
So interesting, here is I think you actually hit the nail on the head in that there's a lot going on here that is reminiscent of like 1930s, 1940s sci-fi, which is interesting because, Superman really originated in that time period. So doing sort of an homage to that kind of storytelling style is not necessarily a bad idea. There's even, I'm sure I'm gonna butcher his name, but John Buscema. Buscema. Thank you so much. Yeah, I always can rely on you to
my Italian,
my horrible pronunciation. So John Buscema here really even seems to kind of channel sort of an old school mentality with his art, and I think it works quite well. I think my real problem with this is that everybody is so darn selfish in this book, and that is hard to wrap your head around when really these are the characters, Superman, Lois Lane, that are probably the least selfish, in the original DC canon. So, I have Superman who has all these powers, but he does good because he thinks it's right. And then, Stan Lee's version of Superman does good because he thinks that if he cuts down on crime, then humans can maybe, accomplish better science faster, and he can, get them to build something to get him back home. And Lois Lane, as you already mentioned, is very much only concerned with the bottom line. So it feels to me like whereas the Wonder Woman book, I think, tried to capture at least some kind of essence of what makes a Wonder Woman a Wonder Woman, I think the Superman book really fell short in that regard. Now, I will freely say I think the design of the suit is actually really cool. And interesting too, with the idea that like part of it is like a flight harness that let him fly on his home world. I think there's some cool stuff there, and the outfit is very neat. But even like this little detour that they do in the book where he becomes like a circus performer for like a hot second because he needs money, it's just so out of left field. Like, I need some money. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the circus. Like, that's not really my first instinct. I don't think that would be most people's first instinct. Let's go to the circus and make some money. But it's such a bizarre little detour. And even Lois, appearing on his doorstep as this talent agent, it just seems like, everything on the alien planet kind of at least somewhat clicked. But then as soon as they get to Earth, the whole thing just derailed. I even, I like the setup, in theory. I like the notion of like, there's this bald villain, shades of like Luthor, who was incarcerated by this cop on an alien world, and then they both get stranded on Earth, and he's like in pursuit of this criminal that, killed a loved one of his and that he had previously captured and put away. And then there's the question of how they get home. Like, it's a very rich setup for drama. It's just I don't want to say it looks good on paper because we saw it on paper. So let's say it looks good in theory, but the execution, I think, left a lot to be desired, Chris.
Yeah, and I will say I was a fan of the art. I'm a big fan of both Buscema's, John and Sal. Sal's work on Superior Spider-Man with J.M. DeMatteis is some of my favorite comics ever. But it was just the only thing that I found truly problematic with the art were these weird gaucho pants that Galrock was wearing. It was really weird. Like, he looked like he got them out of his sister's closet or something. Like, they were way too short. He was showing off some shin, like, as he's going around. It's really hard to be menacing when you're wearing women's pants like that, like, that are way too short. Like, so that was distracting a bit. But other than that, I really was compelled. I think the one bright spot of this, and I totally agree with, like, when they got to Earth, it kind of fell off the rails. I was intrigued on the alien planet. When they got to Earth, like, all these hijinks were just really weird and strange. I will say that the one part that really intrigued me, and this is a common thread that I look forward to following as these stories continue, is the Dominic Dark kind of thread, almost like a Kindred type of thread for Amazing Spider-Man fans, like this big bad that's kind of throughout, and like you're sparsing it along just a little, like breadcrumb trail, a little bit here, a little bit there. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
Oh, I am too. I will also say, though, and I think this must be said, what was the deal with Stan Lee absolutely refusing to name the alien world? Like, yeah. Why can't it just be Krypton if you're doing a riff on Superman? Or like like something that's named after a different element or something? Like, you couldn't pronounce it anyway, so I'm not telling you where he's from. It's kind of a weird, I don't know, that was an odd way to start the story. I was a little taken aback by that move. But other than that, the stuff on the alien planet, for the most part, clicked somewhat. But man, that Earth stuff did not, Chris.
No, not at all.
All right. Well, we have one more, and this one was in a lot of ways probably the most intriguing in setup, although some of the choices made I probably would have not taken. But it is very, very interesting, and that's, of course, just imagine Stan Lee created Batman. In this particular story, according to Goodreads, we meet Wayne Williams, an African-American man framed for a robbery, consumed with thoughts of revenge against those who framed him. Wayne is freed from prison with a powerful physique and a bold new purpose. And a very, very, very interesting suit. I will say that as well. So, Chris, what is your take on Stan Lee's Batman?
Well, first and foremost, I didn't know he was African American, so like that was really interesting choice coloring wise. He did have some features that like speculate, caused me to speculate that he might be multiracial, but I did not know that. Um, I would have called this Amazing Fantasy 16 because it is heavily derivative of Peter Parker's origin story. It is a lot of the same type of stuff. He goes on to be a professional wrestler. That's how he makes all of his money and his billions. So this, and I will say, this is the first one I read, and like as soon as I opened it and I saw the extensive prologue, the wordiness, not as wordy as Stan is known to be, certainly not Claremont-esque, but it reminds me what I love about reading Stan Lee stories. It's like almost like Shakespearean level of of writing in a comic book. So that really kind of scratches that itch of like the lover of classical literature that I am. So I did enjoy this book, even if it was basically just switching out a spider for a bat. Like it's extremely similar to that. Similarly to the Wonder Woman book, it plays fast and loose with the ideas of stakes um, and killing off characters, and like it gets real quick. I thought it was very much written of its time. It kind of had its feet in two pools, if you will. Like it was very much like I said, derivative of Amazing Spider-Man. So it felt like a 60s or 70s book, but then like they tried to make it 2001/2002 by making the villain's name Hands with a Z. Um, so,
Yeah.
um,
Oh my
yeah.
god.
So like overall I enjoyed it. It was just like, okay, it's like a lesser quality episode of a show that you enjoy. So I really did appreciate like the story of Wayne Williams, but in that aspect it fell kind of flat. I kind of dug this suit. It was horrifying. So like it would definitely inspire fear on the enemies, but um, it was also, the ending was a little bit lackluster. So I wanted a little bit more of that, but I overall I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so this one falls kind of in the middle for me, between the Superman and the Wonder Woman books. Whereas the Wonder Woman book I really enjoyed, and the Superman book it didn't work for me. There are things here in this Batman book that work, at least for me, and then there are things that did not. Yeah, so I really like the idea of him being sort of a self-made millionaire rather than, inheriting the wealth. There's something really appealing about, Batman not just physically training himself and mentally training himself, but also, making his own money rather than just inheriting it. I really like that. I really like the notion of an African American Batman, although again, I will echo what you said in that the coloring I don't think made that necessarily very clear. Uh, Joe Kubert's art here is actually really, really good, and I really enjoyed that as well. I don't really like the suit though. I think, going with a Batman look that is like hyper realistic looking, like trying to actually look like a giant bat, especially the helmet face mask piece with the bat nose and the fangs, and like it's a little much, I
Yeah.
think, in the context of a traditional superhero story. Like, let me put it this way: if Batman would have been originally designed like this, and that's how it would have been, how Batman would have been released, I don't think he would have lasted as long. I don't think the look just necessarily screams iconic. Whereas I think the Wonder Woman design is fantastic, and even the Superman design is pretty good. This Batman look really rubs me the wrong way. I noticed the shades of Spider-Man in this one, as that you did as well. I also noticed some hints of Luke Cage there with the whole, wrongfully imprisoned stuff. So I also am not horribly happy that it's kind of going into stereotype territory a little bit. On the one hand, on the other hand, I really like the Count of Monte Cristo vibe that I feel they were
Yes,
going
my
for.
favorite book ever. I was about
I'm
to
a
say
big
that.
fan as well, yeah. And so that, what if the story of Batman was the Count of Monte Cristo? Like, what if he, his whole training and everything is not to rid the world of crime, but to find this one guy who wronged him and take that sucker down. Like, that is an interesting take on a Batman story. In execution, maybe not perfect, but I think the guts of a really, really interesting take on Batman are definitely here.
Yeah, also, can we talk about how absolutely terrifying this bat's tongue is and how weird it is that he actually keeps him as
Oh,
a pet? So
it's just so weird. I always thought that was one of the weirder parts, even of like Straczynski's run on Spider-Man, when Spidey started like, trying to talk to spiders and would like use them and like, I'm like, dude, they're not his sidekicks. That's a little weird. I mean, with Squirrel Girl, it works a little bit to have a squirrel running around with her, but Batman, I don't think should probably have a bat pet. It's just a little odd.
I think my biggest critique of this, the thing that rubbed me the wrong way, and we referenced this earlier, is Stan's depiction of women. You know,
Oh yes, oh yes.
it was highly problematic here. Um, so this woman Nita, who is the love interest of the big bad, but like also Wayne is kind of into, and then also his mother is just this like stereotypical, oh, like woe is me mother who just dies of a broken heart, Padme style. And then this woman is just like staying around with a man that she doesn't want to marry. It's really, really dated. And to have been written in 2001, 2002 is just really unfortunate.
Yeah, I can agree with that. There are definitely some very, very old school tendencies that I don't think Stan ever quite shook. And they do definitely come out in some of these issues. All right, Kris. So, having reviewed Stan Lee's Trinity, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, what are sort of your overall thoughts about this endeavor of trying to read this whole series?
Well, I'm intrigued, like I said before, on this Dominic Dark, not Damien Dark. I keep having to tell myself it's not Damien Dark. I'm really intrigued by that whole storyline, how that's going to continue to play out. And then I'm also interested to see the reimagining of these other characters. And they certainly can't be any worse than the Superman one, which was just plain weird. So it can only go up from there. The Wonder Woman one is going to be tough to beat, even with that kind of wet fart of an ending with that tabloid guy getting all the glory. But I'm super excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, I'll echo that. This was, not awful. Let's put it that way. Besides the Superman one, but the Batman reimagining certainly had some interesting ideas. Even the Superman reimagining, the beginning of it on the alien planet had some nice stuff going on. But that Wonder Woman issue, I think, for the most part, was a home run and was the one version of the character that I would actually want to see more of. So yeah. I'm very interested to see where else this goes, Kris.
One more point on the Batman thing. I know one of the biggest, kind of running jokes about Batman is he's this billionaire who dresses up in cosplay and beats the crap out of criminals instead of working behind the scenes to better crime in Gotham. I think this story, believe it or not, kind of works better explaining the quote unquote history of violence and like why he's prone to use those types of methods better than this elitist coming down from on high to beat the crap out of people.
Yeah, it kind of changes the equation when the person is, like I mentioned earlier, a self-made success rather than like upper class has to come down and beat up the lower class. There is a certain amount of equaling that out a little bit and making it a little more palatable. I think I totally agree with that, Kris. All right, that's our first look at Stan Lee's creations of the DC Universe in Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Stay tuned for future episodes where we're going to dive further into Stan Lee's DC reimaginings. For now, though, let's go ahead and head to a break, and when we come back, it's going to be time for some nerd commendations. Stick around. Ladies and gentle people, we're back. It's time for everybody's favorite segment of the Nerd Byword. I'm, of course, talking about That's right, nerd commendation time. Kris, what are you commending this week?
Oh, it's by far the best comic I read this week, and it is Tom Taylor and Iban Coelho's Dark Ages #1. This miniseries is what would happen if all electricity went out in the Marvel Universe and we're forced to return to the Dark Ages. So you've got a steam-powered Iron Man. Tom immediately won me over, though, because the very first page, Pete and MJ are assumingly married. They have a baby girl, a fiery redhead May, who is on the ceiling. They are having pizza and drinks with Luke Cage and Jessica Jones and Danny, just setting up that. And then all hell breaks loose. The Spider People, Miles and Gwen as well, immediately feel something's triggered. It's a great feature by Lunella Lafayette, Moon Girl, and her Devil Dinosaur. I will say that the mutants featured in here, it was a little bit odd because it was very much out of place with what's going on in Krakoa right now. So I'm taking this as an alternate universe type of situation. Fantastic Four is heavily involved. But basically what happens is this living machine threatened to unmake. It's called the Unmaker, was going to destroy the universe, and then he is defeated but cannot be destroyed. So he is buried in the center of the earth in a deep slumber, but now he has awakened. And in order to take him out, they have to do this grand EMP pulse that wipes out all of electricity. So kind of the return to the Dark Ages. So it's really, at least what I've been told. I have not read Deceased, but Tom really got a lot of acclaim for himself writing Deceased over at DC. A lot of post-apocalyptic type vibes from that is what I'm told by other people who have read it. So I'm gonna have to check out Deceased, but it's really interesting. Finally getting, I love series like this and Spider-Man Life Story, which is another future nerd commendation. I've totally forgot I haven't nerd commended, is where we get to move on. We've talked about this a lot. Peter Parker, as my friend Ash from X of Words would say, is the Peter Pan of the Marvel Universe. He's never allowed to grow up. So being able to see these characters, even if it's an alternate universe, grow up and not just do the same old things, working the same old jobs, and actually progressing, it's really fascinating to see, and having some actual stakes. So I absolutely love this issue, and I cannot wait to follow this series.
Man, I don't know how this one slipped past me. I remember reading about it that when it was announced, and I completely missed out on the fact that the sucker has actually been, released. So I am totally here for this. This sounds exactly up my alley. Plus, I'm a big fan of Taylor's anyways. I like his work generally. So yeah, I'm here for this, Kris. You actually, kind of won me over instantly, and I cannot wait to pick this up.
So just imagine a little bit darker tinged Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows. So if you're a big Spidey fan, definitely check this one out.
Yeah, I'm here for this.
All right, Dave, you are heading to the final frontier in a nerd commendation that I'm very excited to check out already.
Yeah, so I have actually in a previous episode talked about the first part to this, and I'm finally in volume 2, and that is, of course, the 50-year mission, which is all about being the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of Star Trek, written by Edward Gross and Mark Altman. And I'm going to tell you right now, I absolutely adored the first volume. It covered the original series and the original series-based 6 movies. And then it ended. And so the second volume really has its work cut out for it, because it covers the Next Generation television series and the Next Generation movies. It then goes on to do Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and ends with the J.J. Abrams movies. So no Discovery or anything like that. This book came out before Discovery was a thing. But let me tell you, I am not, and I have to freely admit this, I'm not the biggest Next Generation fan. And I think, actually, that this book helped me understand why that is a little bit. but I still found all the behind the scenes stuff extremely fascinating, especially considering that Gene Roddenberry was still involved in development of that show. And one of the edicts, apparently, that Gene Roddenberry sort of handed down was that there really shouldn't be any interpersonal conflict within the crew because we have, as human beings, evolved past that. And so to me, that explains a lot why The Next Generation didn't resonate as much with me unless it was like a Worf episode, because there was plenty of interpersonal conflict when the Klingons were involved. But the humans to me always came across as a little aloof, a little separate, and a little mannequin-like, not quite human, because they never argue, they never fuss, there's never really any conflict between them. And real people have conflicts. And that is, I think, why Deep Space Nine resonated so much more with me. You know, the show was sort of put into motion after the passing of Gene Roddenberry. And the writing staff on that show very much was trying to sort of stretch the rules a little bit without breaking them. And there was plenty of conflict there, and the people feel more real to me and more fully realized. So I've not completely finished this book yet. I'm in the Voyager section right now. But just based alone on the deep exploration of The Next Generation and of Deep Space Nine alone, I already have to just go ahead and nerd commend this book. It is just as good as Round One. It covers a much bigger swath of Trek history, but at no point did I feel so far like anything was shortchanged. The Deep Space Nine segments, especially, really good, going from development, from casting, shakeups in the writing staff, how the long-term sort of stuff was developed, that, you know, the ongoing threads. All of that stuff is here and discussed in great detail. So yeah, I mean, as far as like the history of Star Trek goes, I would say this is about as definite as you can get, is this 2-volume set of the 50-year mission. I think each volume clocks in at somewhere between 500 and 600 pages. And I have not been bored a single time yet, Kris. It's absolutely fascinating.
So I am a big fan of Next Generation, but that totally makes sense, hearing you say that. And I think some of the more exciting episodes of the Next Generation, my favorite one, I think, is when Captain Picard goes back home to France and really finally admits the issues and the pressures and the strain that he has, and he stops being this upstanding perfectionist perfect character, and he actually shows some emotion, and that's when I really fell in love with the character. So that particular episode is one of my all-time favorites.
And it's really funny you mentioned that, Kris, because if I remember correctly from the book, that was actually a Ron Moore penned episode. He would later go on to write for Deep Space Nine and then would later reinvent Battlestar Galactica. And he apparently had to fight pretty hard for that episode. Because apparently there were a lot of people behind the scenes who didn't think it was Next Generation enough, and there was too much conflict in there between people, and he had to fight pretty hard to make sure that that episode gets made, apparently.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, because we've detailed this before. I'm it's like a fine wine. I am taking my time with this, but I'm still in the midst of watching Deep Space Nine for the first time, and I'm only halfway through season 4, and it's already far and away, as much as I love Discovery and all the other new shows as well, it is far and away my favorite Star Trek, and it's not close. So Deep Space Nine, I adore every one of those characters, how complex and complicated they are. Everybody, I love their journey, and like how it's incredible to have such an expansive cast, and yet you feel so plugged into them. It's just magnificent, and it is absolutely, without fail, one of my favorite pieces of nerd media pop culture ever. I love Deep Space Nine, and I can't wait. I've heard such great things about Voyager. I really need to pick up the pace a little bit because I really want to get to Voyager.
I will say this: whenever you get done with Deep Space Nine, there is a Nerd Byword episode and us just sitting down and really talking about Deep Space Nine front to back once, because I have rewatched that show now twice straight through from episode 1 till the final episode. And every couple of years, I feel like I need to start revisiting it because there's just something so resonant about that show to me. So I really cannot wait to sit down and just talk all the little nuances about Deep Space Nine with you. I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
So I was already had already decided the first 3 seasons it was my favorite Star Trek ever, and then season 4 comes along and my all-time favorite Star Trek character period, Worf, joins the cast. I'm like this is a perfect show.
Alrighty, folks. Well, that is it for another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this week. As always, we are so very pleased that you've decided to join us for an hour of absolute nerding out. If you like what you heard today, please be sure to get on your favorite podcasting platform. Give us a rating or review, and just, subscribe and follow us. We always have a new episode every Monday. You can find us wherever podcasts are available, including our very own website, nerdbyword.com.
You can also check us out on social media at nerdbyword on Twitter and Instagram, or individually at thatnerddave and thatnerdchris, respectively. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.